Alright, so tonight's video is about solving inequalities algebraically, basically doing things mathematically and not with pictures. The things I need to remember is I want all the constants on one side, so all of those numbers. Like if I just have like a +5 or a -7, I want to get all those on one side. And I can do that by adding or subtracting that number family on each side to cancel them out. And then I also want a coefficient of 1 in front of the x, right? So in order to get that coefficient of 1, either multiply or divide both sides by that coefficient, So for example, if I have that 2x, we divide that by 2 because that gives me that coefficient of 1. Okay, that's really what that step means. So let's do a couple of quick examples. Remember, we treat inequalities just like we treat equations. All right, so I have 4 times some number x minus 2 is less than 26. So I start with, I want to get rid of the -2. So I add the 2 positives to cancel that out. And what I do on that side, I have to do on the other. So the 2's cancel out, and I'm left with 4x. Those 4 x boxes is less than, 26 plus 2 is 28. So 4 times some number is less than 28. So I can divide both sides by 4, and that gives me that coefficient of 1 of just x is less than, 28 divided by 4 is 7, because I know 4 times 7 gives me 28. So x is less than 7. And if I wanted to check, let's say we can do a quick check. Let's say if I thought x was 5, so I do 4 times 5 minus 2. Well, 4 times 5 is 20, minus 2 is 18, and 18 is less than 26, so my x is less than 7. It works. All right, so let's look at another one that's a little bit more difficult. 1/2 times t plus 5 is less than 11. All right, well, I start with, I've got that plus 5, so I want to add a -5 over there to cancel that out, okay? And remember, adding and subtracting are inverse operations, so they cancel each other out. So really when I'm thinking about this, I can take this number and write it right here, and then this is the opposite operation of this. But what I do to this side, I have to do to this side. So since I subtracted 5 on the left, I have to subtract 5 on the right, and that leaves me 6. So 1/2 times t is less than 6. So I have 1/2 times some number is less than 6. All right, well, I can divide both sides by 1/2. Okay, and I know that it's kind of weird to see multiple fractions in this fraction, but it's a division problem, so it's okay. So 1/2 divided by 1/2, it gets rid of that. That gives me my coefficient of 1, so I'm left with t. But now I have to do 6 divided by 1/2. So up here, 6 divided by 1/2. All right, so I have to remember when I have a whole number, if I put it over 1, that turns it into a fraction. All right, so now I have fractions. Now I need to think about keep, change, flip. So keep, change, flip. Keep the 6 over 1, change division to multiplication, and flip that 1/2 to 2 over 1. Remember, 1 goes down, the 2 goes up. So now I can multiply like normal. 6 times 2 is 12. 1 times 1 is 1. 12 over 12 is, 12 over 1 gives me 12, because 12 divided by 1 gives me 12. So t is less than 12. All right, so let's think about this. So t is less than 12, so let's do a check and say, well, what if t was equal to 10? Okay, so 1/2 times 10 plus 5. All right, well, again, I'm going to put 10 over 1. I have my fractions, so I can do 1 times 10 is 10, 2 times 1 is 2. So 10 halves is the same as 5. Okay, so this part right here is 5. And then I bring down this plus 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. And 10 is less than 12. So that works as well. All right. Remember when I see 1/2 t, that means I'm cutting t in half. 1/2 t is like me cutting t in half. So I'm like dividing it by 2. 1/2 times t is the same thing as t divided by 2. Okay, we can think about 1/2 times t, I'm cutting t in half. All right, so there is one little exception to inequalities. And that has to do with when we deal with negative numbers, when we're multiplying or dividing. All right, so let's look at this example. So I have negative 3x plus 5 is bigger than 17. And we're going to kind of do a different solving approach. We're going to start by canceling out the 3x's. So we add 3x to both sides to cancel out those. So now I have 5 still on this side, and then the 17 plus 3x, because right here I added the 17 plus the 3x. And then if I subtract 17 from both sides, okay, 5 minus 17 gives me negative 12, and I'm left with my 3x. And then I can divide both sides by 3 to get my coefficient of 1. Okay, so then I am left with that that negative 4 is greater than x. Okay, so that gives me an answer. So now when I come through and I solve it the way we've always talked about, where I start with canceling out that. So negative 3x plus 5 is greater than 17. We cancel out the 5's. I'm left with just the 3x. Well, 17 minus 5 is 12. So I'm dividing. So now I have negative 3x is greater than 12. But I'm now dividing by the negative 3 here. Okay? So I have x and I have negative 4. Well, up here, we saw that x has to be less than negative 4. Negative 4 has to be greater than x. So I had to flip that sign. This is where we flip the sign for the answer to work. The sign has to switch in order to match that answer above, this answer we got up here. Okay? So when we're multiplying or dividing by a negative number, I have to switch the sign. And I know this is really kind of confusing, and it's one of those little exceptions. You're like, how am I going to remember this? Well, let's think about this for one more minute. Okay? So when we think about equations, we think about them as a scale. And if you even think about, we would draw like the 2 x's, and 2 little ones, and then like 4 little ones over here. We were always treating it like a scale, like they were equal, kind of like this right here. And an inequality can be thought of an unbalanced scale. 2 is bigger than 1. That's why 2 is heavier, and it's down here at the bottom. Okay? Multiplying by negative 1 is like reversing gravity, so that things fall up, and the heavier object is now pulled more strongly. So when we do that, the scale is reversed. Okay? So negative 2 is less than negative 1. And we can even think about it on a number line. All right? So if I have 0 and negative 1 and negative 2 and negative 3, okay? And we think about that the bigger numbers are always the numbers to the right. So if I'm looking at negative 2 and negative 1, we know that negative 1 is bigger. It's the bigger number because it's more to the right. Okay? So when we're multiplying by the negative 1, it's that reversing gravity, because now, even though we're looking at the numbers, that negative now means, because negative 1 is bigger than negative 2. So that multiplying by negative 1 is like reversing gravity. And if we just remember, if we think about it, that negative 2 is smaller than negative 1, okay, it kind of helps us remember that we need to switch that sign, because the inequality is thought like an unbalanced scale. All right, so let's try a problem. All right, so divide both sides by -5. So we divide both sides by -5, which I know is going to switch the sign. Okay, so that becomes my coefficient of 1. So f 35 divided by 5 is 7. And then switch, I have a positive and negative, so my sign is negative. And I'm going to switch that sign, so it now becomes like that. And now we can check to see if that works, right? So let's check, like -10. So -10 is less than -7. So now let's look at this. So -5 times -10. 5 times 10 is 50, and my signs are the same, so my answer is positive. Yep, 50 is bigger than 35. So f has to be less than -7. Because if we think about, like, let's do another one with -4. So -5 times -4. Okay, well, -4 is bigger than -7. All right, so let's check. -5 times -4. 5 times 4 is 20. I have both negatives, so my sign is positive. Well, 20 and 35, 20 is actually less than 35, so that doesn't work. So that reinforces that my f, my variable, has to be less than -7. All right, let's try another example. -6 plus 2 is less than 10. Pause the video and see if you can try this one on your own. Unpause when you're done. All right, subtract 2 from both sides. That cancels out. Gives me -6x. 10 minus 2 is 8. Divide both sides by -6. So I get my coefficient of 1, x. 8 divided by -6. Well, I can treat that like a fraction and just leave that as -8/6. But I can also simplify that. If I divide both sides by 2, it gives me -4/3 x. And then I said I need to flip my sign, so x is greater than -4/3. Cool. Here's my next example. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That cancels out. -8x is greater than 15 plus 9 is 24. Divide both sides by -8. Coefficient of 1, x. 24 divided by 8 is 3. Positive and negative gives me a negative. And I flip my sign, so x is less than -3. The last example. Oh, we've seen this one, I think. Some number divided by 7 plus 1 gives me, it's greater than 2.5. So subtract 1 from both sides. That's like x divided by 7. That's actually, I should line up my decimals. So that leaves me with 1.5. X divided by 7 gives me 1.5. So if I multiply both sides by 7, that'll cancel out and give me my coefficient of 1. It's positive, so my sign stays the same way. And 1.5 times 7. 5 times 7 is 35. Carry my 3. 1 times 7 is 7. Plus 3 is 10. Got one number behind the decimal, so one number behind the decimal leaves me with 10.5. So x needs to be bigger than 10.5. Sorry that the last couple of examples were kind of rushed. I'm running out of time on my video, so if you need to watch them more than once to see what I did, that's what you'll need to do. I hope this has answered some questions about solving equations, maybe given us some more review, and I'll see you tomorrow.